Everyone, welcome back to Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh and myself. My name is Jay. I'm a volunteer with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I myself made Aliyah with Nefesh B'Nefesh over 15 years ago. And we want to welcome you to Cafe Oleh's summer session. For the next 10 weeks, we are going to be together, just like we have been for the last few years, going over the everyday Hebrew that you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's reading your electricity bills or going grocery shopping or striking up a conversation, flirting, arguing, whatever it may be. But going on with your life fully as you would in your respective countries of origin, using the words that you use in English, in French, in Spanish, whatever your native language may be. And with a focus on introductory levels, because oftentimes those who are just starting out learning Hebrew are often at a lack of words. They don't have the vocabulary, they don't have the context yet to use the Hebrew that they're learning. And that's where we fill this in with Cafe Oleh, going over everyday Hebrew. As that is the case, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. As always, please email Nefesh B'Nefesh, or you can write in the chat box here in the Zoom window if you're joining us live. Any questions you have, any requests you have for upcoming topics, we always want to hear them for you. So let's get right started. We are 24 hours away from Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, and 48 hours away from HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, this year, 2022, as of this recording and live webinar. So what we're going to do today is go over those 48 hours. They are unmistakably Israeli, unmistakably unique in how they are part of Israeli society. And oftentimes, even if we grew up celebrating these and commemorating these two holidays abroad, it's a significant difference being an Israeli citizen, being an Oleh and Olah, i.e. an Israeli citizen, and celebrating it here when maybe we haven't served in the army or we didn't grow up here, or all of it is brand new as a citizen and we're thrown into it just like everyone else, as opposed to being on a trip or commemorating from abroad. So we're going to go through what to expect in those 2 days, some of the major words and themes that are used throughout it. And we're also going to explore together at first one of the most important set of words in going through these 2 days, and frankly also last week's Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah, which is the root, and we talk about the root words in Hebrew, and shorashim, which is the Hebrew for a root, a literal root in the ground, meaning Zayin, Chaf, Resh. Those 3 letters in that specific order give us words that have to do with memory and remembering. And we're going to go through some very basic words, but words that we use all the time in modern Hebrew, not just during this period of the year, but are very poignant now. So I'm going to open up my spreadsheet of the words that we're going to go through today. As always, if you have questions about what I'm going through in this specific lesson, please write it in the Q&A button as you see on the Zoom window. Otherwise, anything else, please write in the chat. I will get to as many questions as I can at the end. And let's get started. Sorry, just 1 second. There we go. Okay, so as always, Hebrew is in the middle with the dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds. In Hebrew, we call that nikud, because the letters in Hebrew typically do not make vowel sounds like they do in English and other alphabets. Transliteration on the right, English on the left. So like I said, we are talking about Israel's Memorial and Independence Days, which have a lot to do with memory and remembering things. And like I said, this root, these 3 letters, Zayin, Chaf, Resh, when they're in that order, with other vowel sounds and helper letters around it and even between it, give us all sorts of other words, give us actual words as opposed to just the root that we use all the time, but especially in these days. So let's go through some of these together. First one is one you probably know before, which is lizkor, or lizkor, depending on how you say the letter resh. Right? Lizkor means to remember. This is the infinitive, so it is not conjugated. You can conjugate this on your own. I've shared before many times various resources how to do that, as well as your own dictionaries at home. But lizkor is pretty simple. It's not every day. It is a regular verb conjugates regularly, it is followed by a direct or indirect object, which is why you see in the parentheses here, it says ani zocher et, which translates to I remember for man, for male rather, and then et is usually before a direct object. It doesn't have to be before a direct object, it can be indirect. The point though is it's followed by either of those. Now let's get to another verb that has the same root. And actually in everyday Hebrew in Israel, you're going to hear a lot more than this verb. I remember from learning Hebrew myself, liskol was taught quite often. This next verb, after many, many years of learning Hebrew, I didn't learn until I was actually in Israel using Hebrew. And this one I hear all the time. It is used all the time. This is the one I want you to focus on, which is lehizacher. Okay, lehizacher or lehizacher is also an infinitive. This gets best translated as to be reminded or to recall. Okay, there's all sorts of poetry, poems rather, and songs and other things that use this verb because it's recalling, right? That's a very lofty word in English, but in Hebrew, we use this all the time when you want to say, I recall something happening, meaning I remember something happening. This verb gets used probably more often than liskol, actually, in everyday conversation. So lehizacher, here's a way to use it as it says here in the parentheses, ani nizkarti be. Ani, I, nizkarti is the past tense first person singular. So I recalled, and this is followed by the preposition be. Okay, if I want to say, I recalled the last time we met. Ani nizkarti bapam hakodemet shenifgashnu. Ani nizkarti, I recalled, or I recall. This is in the past tense, so it can be translated also either way into English. Bepam hakodemet, the last time, pa'am is time, kodemet, prior. She nifgashnu, that we met. Okay, this verb is going to be used a lot more, typically only in the past and present tense. So if you want to make a note on that, as you're either writing down these words or taking a screenshot of them, feel free. As always, there will also be a recording of this put up on YouTube. Okay, so lehizacher is used much more than liskol. As you see there, translation into English is similar enough that they're interchangeable, right? So if I want to say, I remember going somewhere, you could say, I recall going somewhere, or I was reminded of this place, right? Either way, but just know that lehizacher you're going to hear more often than liskol in modern Hebrew. And then finally, of the verbs that are created from this shoresh of zayin chaf resh, we have lahazkir. Okay, lazkir or lazkir means to remind. It's the causative form of the root. So to cause to remember. To cause someone to remember something is to remind them. Right? It's a nicer way to say it, certainly in English, but that's its derivation in Hebrew. And this is followed by the preposition le. As you see here in row 6, ani mazkir le, I remind you. If I want to say I remind you to a woman, ani mazkir lach. Saying it to a man, ani mazkir lecha, and so forth. That just gets conjugated accordingly. Okay, so from this root, we already have 3 verbs you'll hear quite often in modern Hebrew. Lazkir, to remind, lehizacher, to be reminded or to recall, and lizkor, to remember. Okay, let's go through some other words, particularly nouns that come with the same root. Again, this is used all throughout these next 2 days, as well as last week for Yom HaShoah, but also throughout the year, because as we know, for Jews and Israelis, memory is a very important part of our identity. So first one, straight up memory, zikaron. Okay, zikaron, it is masculine, even though memories is zichronot. We've talked about this before. When you see the on ending, vav, nun, sofit at the end of words, like you see here in zikaron, it is still masculine, even though in its plural form it looks feminine. Okay, so zikaron is one memory. Zichronot are memories. Okay, so zikaron. Next one. This is an important one in terms of distinctions between Jewish expressions in terms that we use abroad versus in Israel. Azkara. Azkara or azkara is a memorial, Or for many of you, especially from North America and the UK, this is also what we say in modern Hebrew instead of yahrzeit. Remember, yahrzeit is Yiddish, not Hebrew. And remember that most of Israeli Jews do not come from Yiddish-speaking countries 2-3+ generations ago. They come from Middle East and North African countries. So Azkara is modern Hebrew, yahrzeit is Yiddish. Okay, but both mean the same thing of if you are commemorating the day someone passed away, that is their Azkara, yahrzeit in Yiddish. Okay, Azkara. Another very practical word every day, tizkoret. Tizkoret or tizkoret, a reminder. Okay. Tizkorot are reminders. You can look up all these plurals on your own, but just know tizkoret. I have these all the time in my Google Calendar where you can do the auto reminder or things like that. Tizkoret. You'll hear this word quite a lot. Also related, I think appropriately so, is the word mazkeret, or mazkarot is the plural. Mazkeret is a souvenir, right? Think about it. It's something that reminds you. You recall an experience through this object, or it's a reminder of an experience you had with an object. That could be anything, right? Is a souvenir, but mazkeret is the word for souvenir. So if you are here in Israel taking around family or friends, and you're looking for a tourist trap of a place, they want to buy something to remember their trip by, and you are not feeling necessarily so inspired or creative, you're going to look for a sign that if it doesn't say it in English, it says mazkiret or mazkarot in the front shop window. Okay. And then finally, in our words with this same root of zayin chaf resh, is the word mazkir and mazkira. Mazkir and mazkira are just feminine, masculine and feminine of the same word, which means secretary, right? It's the person who reminds you to do something, because this word is the participle. It's the noun that comes from that verb we had before in row 6, lazkir, right? So lazkir, to remind. Mazkir is the person who reminds you. It's the active participle. So the person who reminds you, your secretary. Mazkir is a male secretary, mazkira, female secretary. This is the word that we use to describe government officials, by the way, in the United States, also in the UK and anywhere else where the head of the office is known as the secretary, right? So in the United States, the defense secretary is Maskira Hagana or Maskira Bitachon, either one. Hagana literally means defense, Bitachon means security. Okay, and then we also have the word Mazkirut. Mazkirut is, since it was May Day yesterday, is an important one. Also understanding Israel's founding fathers and mothers, and for many of its initial years was very socialist in orientation. Mazkirut is an important one, secretariat. Okay, that can also, by the way, be the office in which the secretaries reside. So if you're in a big institution like a university, or a law firm or anything like that, you'll have a mazkirut, and that is where all the clerks perhaps sit, or the secretaries themselves. But mazkirut, also for those of you with regards to socialism and communism and all of that, but mazkirut is that as well. By the way, the name of the head of the United Nations also uses the same word, mazkir klali, secretary general. Klali means general. In Hebrew, we abbreviate this as mazkal, but not the Mexican liquor, but mazkal, mazkir klali. So same word that we have here, secretary. Okay, this word, this root, zayin chaf resh, as you see, creates all sorts of words that you're going to hear in the next 24, 48, 72 hours, but also you're going to hear year round. Let's start getting into it. So, like I said, Yom HaZikaron. As you recall, in Israel, we have these 3 holidays or 3 commemorations. Yom HaShoah, which was last week, Yom HaZikaron, which is tomorrow, Yom HaAtzmaut, the day after. And these 3 are uniquely Israeli, right? They're not based in Jewish tradition. They're based in Israeli history, as well as Jewish history. And they are, as a result, new inventions that come with their own traditions. They come with their own ideas behind them. So for example, Yom HaShoah which was last week, is meant to be commemorated on the day of the start of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, understanding that at the beginning of the State of Israel, they want to focus on the other part of the name of the holiday, which is Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura. Gvura is bravery or heroism, so focusing on that. And then there's Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaAtzmaut came first. That is the day the Declaration of Independence was signed here in Tel Aviv. And the idea was, after the War of Independence was done, with so many fallen soldiers and civilians who were killed or injured, they needed a day to memorialize the dead. And so they came up with this notion that just as in other parts of Jewish tradition, we put together sadness and joy, that we don't separate the two together. We're reminded of the two as ever constant parts of our lives. It's the same idea here, that immediately preceding Yom HaAtzmaut would be Yom HaZikaron, understanding we can't celebrate our freedom and independence without acknowledging those who sacrificed their lives to get there. And that takes, you'll see that in how these 48 hours take place, that is literally ingrained into us in every step. So let's get started with Yom HaZikaron. So Yom HaZikaron will start here tomorrow evening. This is 2022 when you're watching this on YouTube. But in future years, as all Jewish holidays begin in the evening, the actual name of Yom HaZikaron is not Yom HaZikaron. That is the abbreviated name, right? It's like Memorial Day in other countries. This is the full official name of the commemoration. Yom HaZikaron lechalalei ma'achot Yisrael ulenifge'ei pe'ulot ha'eva. It's a long word, so long term. So that's why we just say Yom HaZikaron. But let me take you through this because it helps explain what's going to happen during these 24 hours. Okay, so Yom HaZikaron, we already went through this. Yom, day, Zikaron, memory, we just had that, or memorial. Lechalalei ma'achot Yisrael. You see here in row 13, it's the second part of that first line and the first word in the second. Chalalei ma'achot Yisrael. Chalal is a really interesting word in Hebrew, and in a future lesson, maybe we'll unpack it based on its own shoresh, its own root. Because chalal can mean space, like out in outer space. It can mean space as in a hall, like an enclosed space. And halal also refers to someone who fell in battle. Okay, a soldier, a civilian, it doesn't matter. They're called halal. Okay, so halalei ma'arachot Yisrael. Ma'aracha, one of these is a battle or any military campaign. Understanding that in Israel, we don't just have wars. We have military campaigns. We have surprise attacks. There are all sorts of different things that fall under Memorial Day. And remember, Memorial Day, just like Independence Day, is in a military context here in Israel, right? They were all about battles. Yom HaAtzmaut, as soon as it was signed, war was declared. And we know about Milchemet HaAtzmaut, the War of Independence that followed. Same with Yom HaZikaron, we're memorializing our dead who have fallen in battle, with an important distinction. So Chalalei Ma'arachot Yisrael are those who have fallen in all of Ma'arachot Yisrael, from actual wars, meaning those campaigns that were designated as wars, to those that were military operations, to those that were just an unfortunate situation that occurred but weren't part of something larger. Okay, that's an important distinction, that everything is included, everyone is included in that. That's also a point about national insurance, what we call here Bituach Leumi, who is considered having fallen in battle, is an important distinction in terms of your welfare rights, both yours and your families, as well as if you've been injured in battle. And the second part of this holiday, which is no less important, Lenifge'ei pe'ulot ha'eva, and for the wounded, nifge'im, wounded, but also meaning victims here, pe'ulot ha'eva. Pe'ulot ha'eva is the proper Hebrew way that we say terror or terrorism. Okay, so Memorial Day is not just about those who fell in battle, i.e. military. It's also civilians who were murdered in terrorist attacks. And that's a more recent introduction to the holiday, but no less important, because that also gets into who is designated as someone who is a terror victim, a victim of terror, right? So that's also an important distinction. This is the full scope of who's included in Yom HaZikaron. And also bear in mind, rather, they say nifge'e peulot ha'eva, right? The injured, nifga is someone who's wounded or injured, not killed or murdered, which talks also about how we view terror here in Israel, that it's not just about those who physically were hurt or physically were killed. It's also all the rest of us who have family to mourn, as well as the psychological scars of it. And we're going to get into that a little bit as well. So this is the full name. Let's get into some other important words with it. This is a word you're going to hear a lot during Yom HaZikaron is shchol. Shchol means bereavement, right? We talk about bereavement a lot on this day. Usually bereavement is something personal. It's only about our families or loved ones that passed away. Shchol, when we talk about it on this day, is a national shchol. As much as we don't want to take on the mourning of other people's families and take away from theirs, we talk about this in the sense of a national understanding of bereavement, of shchol, a shchol klali, you could say, a general bereavement for those who sacrificed their lives or lives were sacrificed, however you want to see it. Okay, and this is where it gets more personal, a mishpacha shekula. You're going to hear in the various speeches, public ceremonies, and events that take place during Yom HaZikaron that many of the speakers are going to first and foremost address mishpachot shekulot. Okay, a mishpacha shekula is a bereaved family. Someone, a family who had an immediate relative, a first-degree relative, who fell in a terror attack and or in battle, in some military battle. Okay, so mishpacha shekula, you're going to hear this word a lot during Yom HaZikaron. Now you have some context as to what it means. Okay, chayal, you know this word. Chayal, chayelet is soldier. Don't need to go too much into that, but just as an important reminder. This is an interesting word, korban and korbanot. Korban is a victim, korbanot, victims. This is the word that we use in modern Hebrew for a victim. That could be of terrorism, that could be of anything. It also could be, by the way, of robbery, sexual assault, harassment. Anything is a korban. Anyone who's suffered something is a korban, which is a difficult word, a challenging word, because its origin in Jewish tradition is sacrifice. Right? We call the thing, the animal that was brought to the temple when it used to exist, a korban, a sacrifice. So that someone who's now being perpetrated against, right, in any of those things, including what we commemorate on Yom HaZikaron, is also a korban, raises all sorts of issues that are outside the scope of what we do here at Cafe Oleh, but hopefully are part of your conversations that you're having with yourselves and each other on this important day. Okay, so let's start with what actually happens. 8 p.m. At the start of Yom HaZikaron, there is a tzfirat zikaron or tzfirat dumia. Either of these words, under tzfirat we've talked about is a siren, S-I-R-E-N. Tzfirat zikaron and tzfirat dumia are a very specific siren. It is a one-note siren. It is not the rising and falling siren that indicates an actual attack. Those of you who've been in Israel, you know that sound. That is not this sound. This is a single note sound. And they always caution you that if, God forbid, there's an attack at that point, you will hear the actual going up and down air raid siren. This is not that. It's the same system, but a different sound. It's just one plateau note. 8 p.m., it's a 1-minute siren where everyone will stop in place. Wherever they are in Israel, they will stop in place. If they're driving, will either pull to the side of the street ahead of time, knowing that at 8 o'clock this is going to happen, or they'll stop in the middle of the street. Same goes with buses, public transportation in general. Some people like to be in the street when this happens to see everyone else stopping. Some people like to be at home. I would encourage you, for those of you who are in Israel, whether it's your first time or not, to experience it. I would also encourage you not to film it. And to own the experience as an Israeli citizen. There are plenty of other people who will be filming it. There are plenty of international news agencies that always film it, and there's lots of film footage on YouTube and elsewhere in the world. You don't need to film it. Experience it as the Israeli citizens we are. That's my one piece with regards to that. Tzfirat Zikaron, like I said, Zikaron means memory, so it's the memorial siren. The other word we use for this is dumiyah. Dumiyah in Hebrew means silence. And the idea is that we stand at attention, we stand in silence when this siren goes off. The siren itself is not silent, our reaction to it is. Okay, so remember we have two of these for Yom HaZikaron. We had one last week for Yom HaShoah. We have one at 8 p.m. and then we have one the following morning for 2 minutes at 11 a.m. Okay, so lest you be caught unaware, you don't know what's going on, you'll hear it at 8 p.m. and 11 a.m. the following morning, and it's a single note. It is not an up and down siren. Okay, and what immediately follows the 8 p.m. as well as the 11 a.m. is what we call a techis. Techis is a ceremony in modern Hebrew, and the primary one starts off at the Kotel on Tuesday evening this year. Wednesday morning will be at HaAtzmaut, Israel's national military cemetery, as well as places throughout the country. There are tkasim, which is the plural, in military cemeteries around the country, in important spots around the country, in all sorts of various languages. There are quite a number in English as usual, as well as most are in Hebrew. You are always welcome to join one. You can also watch all of these on TV, both the one at the Kotel and the one at HaAtzmaut, because they are the official state ceremonies, will be shown live on all the TV channels. If you need a review of TV channels, go into our YouTube playlist at youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. You'll see all the ones that have to do with media literacy or TV. It'll show you various TV websites that you can watch streaming TV live in Israel, whether or not you have a TV or not. Just need an internet connection. Okay, techis happens. During a techis and throughout Yom HaZikaron, you're going to be hearing what we call Shirei Eretz Yisrael. Shirei Eretz Yisrael literally translates to songs of the land of Israel, as you see here in English on the left side, but it's more than that. Many of you have probably heard the joke that Israelis say of, oh, I love when something bad happens because the music is so nice on the radio. Now, we love our Black humor here in Israel, so that may be a little jarring for some of you to hear, but it's true in the sense that whenever something, God forbid, bad happens in Israel, or it's a day of mourning like Yom HaZikaron, the music turns more somber. And the choice of songs are usually more patriotic. They're usually older Israeli songs, or they're contemporary songs about grief, sadness, mourning, loss, anything like that. And people often talk about the change in the sound outside, but also on TV and on radio. This is the type of music you're going to hear. So if you're at a techis, for example, the musical accompaniments, and there always are, will be some of these Shirei Eretz Yisrael. If you're listening to the radio, Galgalatz, Reshet Gimel, any of the main radio stations, you're going to hear these songs as well. TV, anywhere, you're going to hear these. I highly recommend listening to it, even if you can't follow along with the words, even if you use an app like Shazam and it can't find it, the actual names, you get into the feeling of the day because the tempo of the songs dictates it very much. So that's why a lot of people listen to it if they can't by themselves get into the mood for Yom HaZikaron. Okay, and along with that, and sound is really important when we talk about Yom HaZikaron. We talked about the siren, we talked about Shirei Eretz Yisrael. We have another important part of Israeli culture that comes out on this day, both Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Shira Betzibur. Shira Betzibur is literally translates to singing in public. Tzibur is public, Shira is both a song or a poem, but it's also the act of singing. Okay, and this goes back to the days of the pioneers, days of the kibbutzim movement, when this was what you did in the evening for entertainment. You sat around a campfire in a very cliched sense, and you either created songs and or you sang them. And that is a very powerful force in Israel, this idea of communal karaoke, right? It's not one person singing, it's all of us singing together. Many of you know the recent phenomenon known as Kululam. That's where this comes from. Even before that, at the start of the Second Intifada, there was an important TV show called Lo Nafsik Lashir, We Won't Stop Singing, that turned into the very popular reality show Kochab Nolad, A Star is Born. And it's all about a competition through singing, right? It's the reason why Israelis love Eurovision, even if we don't place high. We love this idea of communal sing-along. It brings back all these things that we've done for so many years. And frankly, it brings back Jewish tradition as well, right? That our form of prayer for the last 2,000 years has been through liturgy in the synagogue. Same thing that we pray through song. We express emotions through song, happy, sad, and all in between. So this is a really important tradition. You're going to hear this at Kasim as well. Communal sing-along, Shira Betzibur. Here in Tel Aviv, we've had a tradition for many years called Sharim Bakikar. It actually started after the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and it has since taken place every Yom HaZikaron, perhaps not this year as they're building the light rail right through it, and it hasn't in the last few years because of the pandemic, but Sharim Bakikar is exactly that. A big stage is built in Kikar Rabin in front of the Tel Aviv municipality. For many years, it was emceed by now Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Now that he's in politics, it's usually emceed by actor Lior Ashkenazi. Famous singers will come and sing not only their own songs, but many of these Shirei Eretz Yisrael, so songs written by other people. And it's interspersed with stories of people who've fallen, both in military operations as well as in terror attacks. It's very moving. It's very popular here in Tel Aviv, but the same idea gets played out throughout the country, wherever you are. An important thing to know that on Yom HaZikaron, it is customary, especially those who are grieving themselves, to visit a Beit Kvarot or a Beit Almin. These are actually two of the same, this is the same expression for a cemetery. In Hebrew, one of the ways that we say this is Beit Kvarot. It literally is house of graves. Kever is a grave, Kvarot, graves. Beit Almin is actually Aramaic. It is not Hebrew. Okay, and Almin comes from eternity, the word for eternity, the house of eternity. In other cultures, we have this same metaphor for a cemetery, the house of eternity. This is how we say it in, it's Aramaic in origin, but we use this all the time. And there are many bus depots that stop in or near a Beit Almin. So you'll see this on the sign of bus stops whenever it's getting near a Beit Almin. That's what it's referring to, a cemetery. Okay. Dama Maccabim. Dama Maccabim, those of you who are of Commonwealth origin, so from the UK, Australia, Canada, and so forth, you know about the poppy that you wear during Memorial Day and Armistice Day. It's the same idea here with what's known as Dam HaMaccabim. This is a native flower to the land of Israel. The tradition holds that on the spots in the center of the country where the Maccabees, HaMaccabim, shed blood, these flowers grew, blossomed, and they look like little drops of blood. They're little round things. This is the national mourning flower. And because it's a wildflower, it's often not picked. What instead you'll see are people wearing stickers on their shirts that say Yizkor at the top. We're going to get to that word in a second, and a picture of the flower rather than the actual flower itself. So when you go to a techis, for example, there's usually someone at the entrance who will hand these out, and you'll see people put them on their chest, on their shirt. And that's throughout the country. You'll see this on TV broadcasts throughout the day. You'll see a picture of this flower as well. That's the meaning of it. So it has much to do with the UK tradition of poppies as it is ingrained in Jewish tradition about the Maccabim, HaMaccabim. Okay, that takes us through most of Tuesday, right? Tuesday, Yom HaZikaron is this national sense of mourning and grieving, whether directly or conversely through others. There's the other separate formal techis, ceremony for victims of terror, also at Har Herzl. There are other commemorations through the day. There's the famous broadcast of all the names who have fallen, both in battle as well as in terror attacks on TV. It's also streamed online on YouTube via Kan. So if you just want to look it up, just type in Kan, K-A-N. You should be able to see it. It'll be in Hebrew. You're going to look for something that says Shemot HaNoflim, or Chalalei Malchot Yisrael, like I showed you before. You can just type that in and you'll be able to see it. It's also on TV. Highly recommend watching it. Also, those Shirei Eretz Yisrael, those classic songs of Israel, are playing in a loop in the background. It's a very unique way that Israel shows its honors its fallen, right? And then what happens next? So like I said, these two holidays, Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, come right together. There is no break between the two. The separation between them when it is evening, Wednesday evening, and Yom HaZikaron is officially over, we have something in Israel called techis hadlakat mesuot. Another techis, hadlakat mesuot. Hadlaka comes from lehadlik, which is to light, as in light a fire. Mesu'ah is one of our many words we have in Hebrew for a torch. And the idea here is that we have this ceremony, which in my opinion is the most Israeli, most uniquely Israeli contribution to what it means to be Israeli. We have this ceremony that separates the two. Think, those of you who have more of a Jewish traditional background, think Havdalah. That is that ceremony that separates between the end of Shabbat and the rest of the week. That's this ceremony, but on a much larger stage. It takes place at Har Herzl, in front of Herzl's tomb. You know that big plaza, those of you who've been there before. And it is emceed not by the president, not by the prime minister, but by the speaker of the Knesset. It's a very unique tradition that I'm going to walk you through because I think it's really important to watch and understand how we process grief and joy here in Israel and create new traditions of our own and new culture and new things to celebrate and commemorate together. So first off, the ceremony begins with the end of Yom HaZikaron. So it begins with Yizkor. Yizkor is the first word of the state memorial prayer. It is usually read out by a family member of someone who's fallen, usually in the last year. Very emotional because it's the end and we're being asked to switch from sadness to joy very quickly. So we are also, it's that tenuous balance between the two that we feel in watching this. And then there is a switch. The mood changes. The flags that were being flown at half staff in memory are then raised to the top, and then Yom HaAtzmaut officially begins. The centerpiece of the tekes, of this ceremony, is the Hadlakat HaMesuot, its namesake, the lighting of the torches. What happens is that 12 citizens are picked, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and these are 12 exemplary citizens who have been chosen by the state to represent a common theme for the year. They have done a lifetime achievement of things that under the year's theme, I forget what this year's happens to be, are united together by that, but have done extraordinary things on their own. Each one comes up, they're escorted in by soldiers. They give a testimonial where they say their name, their parents' names, and they talk about committing this, this torch to whatever they do in life. In the background is playing the song Anu Nosim Lapidim. Anu Nosim Lapidim translates, as you see here, we carry or we bring forth the torches. Lapid is not just the name of our foreign minister, last name, it is also another word for a torch. Anu Nosim Lapidim was actually penned in the 1930s for Hanukkah, but it was so popular because it sounds like a march. It is a march. It's a very, it sounds like a classic Israeli song. It's got that European march sound to it. It's rousing, it's very patriotic, and it becomes the centerpiece of this tekes. And it's playing in the background throughout on a loop as this ceremony is unfolding. And at the end of their speech, of their testimonial, they commit lighting this torch, Letiferet Medinat Yisrael, to the glory, to the splendor, to the majesty, Medinat Yisrael, of the state of Israel. It's a beautiful expression. I like using it on Yom HaAtzmaut and throughout the year as an alternative to l'chaim when you're giving a toast, because it's something aspirational. It's not just about where Israel currently is, but where Israel's going. So Letiferet Medinat Yisrael, you'll hear that expression 12 times as they're doing this ceremony. Absolutely beautiful, I think. Then there is a procession of the flag bearers that 120 exemplary soldiers were picked to carry the flags of all the different units in the IDF. Remember, Independence Day in Israel is a military, it was based in the military. Back in the day, there were military parades here in Tel Aviv, as well as in Jerusalem, of tanks, of weaponry, and things like that. So a lot of what you're going to see during the 24 hours of Independence Day has military themes around it, because that's what we're celebrating, the military, not just our signing of the Declaration of Independence, but the resulting war that we won, albeit at a heavy cost. Okay, so what you're going to see is this whole flag-bearing procession. They do flag drills, foot drills, as they're called. Those of you who know that from the United States, of, let's say, marching bands, American football that you've seen in movies, that's what you're going to see. And they do various formations that have to do with Israel. It's campy, it's kitschy, it's super patriotic. I happen to love it all, as you can't, if you can't tell that already. And so you'll hear things like Kadima Tzad, the head commander from the IDF who's administering all this. Kadima means forward, Tzad means march. And then you'll also hear throughout this what we call Tzal Tzoed. Any of you who've woken up at 5 or 6 in the morning to listen to Galei Tzahal or Galgalatz radio stations, you know this tune already. If you've served in the IDF, you know this tune. Even if you haven't done any of these, you've probably heard this tune before. This is the official marching tune, the official anthem of the IDF. You'll recognize it almost immediately, and if you don't, you just watch the techis and you'll hear this quite well. Tzahal Tzoed literally means Tzahal, IDF, is marching. Okay. Finally, what normally closes out the techis, there's all sorts of musical performances, by the way, throughout it, really poignant, really uplifting, and like I said, patriotic. In most years, there is what we call a mofa zikukim, or mofa zikuke dinor, a fireworks display. This year, after many, many years of petitioning, the official state ceremony, the Tekes Hadlakat HaMesuot, will not feature fireworks. Understanding two things. One, all the things that we know about fireworks and pets and fireworks and people in general, but also because Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day, is right next to Yom HaZikaron, and that transition, when you're being asked to grieve again and mourn again, is so difficult for people that there was a hard petition by the public to say too many people suffer from post-trauma. Too many people have heard the sounds of things bursting in the air in the last few years, be soldiers and civilians. Please don't have fireworks. That's not our tradition. We don't need that to celebrate our independence. And so as a result, the formal event at HaAtzmaut will not have it, and many municipalities have decided this year to cancel their fireworks display. Instead, they are looking into quiet pyrotechnic displays. That's what they say is going to be at HaAtzmaut, or some other form of jubilant celebration that involves light and fire in this respect, but not the bang sounds of fireworks that often sets off people's PTSD, understandably so. So for example, here in Tel Aviv, very last minute this morning, the mayor decided to cancel the fireworks display. I believe Jerusalem has also canceled theirs. Many cities and municipalities have canceled theirs already. In understanding both, besides it's a lot of money, but also understanding how sensitive people are to this specific way when we can celebrate in so many other ways our independence. So Independence Day officially starts with the end of this tekes at HaAtzmaut throughout the country. Yom HaAtzmaut is simply the name for it, right? Yom HaAtzmaut. This year we're celebrating 74 years. Excuse me. Atzmaut means independence. What you're going to find are all different ways of people celebrating. One is a mesibat rechov, a street party. Here in Tel Aviv, that for sure is very popular. Jerusalem and other major cities, it is as well, where people will just, whether they have a permit from the police or not, will just take over a street and start partying. It's a lot of fun. You can hop from one to another. You don't need an invitation. Two unique things, although I think in other countries they also do these, which are a little obnoxious, but it's all part of the fun, I guess. Excuse me, is sheleg and patish. Sheleg simply means snow. This refers to soap that's compressed. aerosol into a can, and you'll see kids and teenagers running down the street, spraying each other, and maybe you'll get sprayed too by it. Don't worry, it's most of the time soap or shaving cream, it'll come out. But if you were inclined to wear silk on the night of partying, please reconsider your apparel choices for the evening, going out and having fun. The other thing that you'll see people walking around with is a patish, not a regular patish, thank God. Patish normally means a hammer. These are inflatable hammers or made out of plastic that you bonk each other with the heads, whatever that's about. You'll see people selling all sorts of schlock, as we say in modern Hebrew. That's not Hebrew. Neon bands and light up things and all sorts of nonsense, but to celebrate, to get people in the mood to celebrate our independence. All sorts of different parties, events happening Wednesday night. Thursday day is the actual daytime of Yom HaAtzmaut, and we have some also traditional ways that we celebrate in Israel. The first one is, these two words are actually very much related, as they are related to what I said before about the military being important. Okay, rows 36 and 37. We have a matas and we have a mashat. Those of you already in Israel may have already seen them practicing for the matas this week. Matas comes from the verb latus, which is to fly in a vehicle. Matas is a flyover or an air show. This is when all throughout the country, on certain times of the day, you're going to see various military aircraft being flown over the country doing all sorts of aerial stunts. So if you saw them practicing, they were doing loops and upside downs and twists and all sorts of things like that. Certain parts of the country see more planes than others. That's a security thing, that's a logistics thing. But if you look in the newspaper tomorrow, you will see the timings of all the different, where in your location in Israel, the flyover will take place. And those of you who are along the coast, primarily the Mediterranean, but also the Kinneret and the Red Sea, you will see the mashat, right? You hear the sounds, matas, mashat. They have the same build of a word to denote the same thing. In this case, mashat comes from lashut, to float or to sail, and mashat is the flotilla. This is when, again, Israel's naval vehicles, not all of them, just like not all the aerial vehicles will be out that the IDF uses for obvious reasons, will do a flotilla across a parade in the water along the coast. So certainly here in Tel Aviv, but all across the major cities, you'll see this mashat. Again, the newspaper will publish when that is on Thursday during the day. Three other important things that happen during Yom HaAtzmaut. First off is Chidon HaTanach. Chidon HaTanach is the International Bible Youth Contest. I love watching this. For many years, it was emceed by a man named Avraham Kol, who is known as one of the most prolific scholars of modern Hebrew. And he was known for his articulation of modern Hebrew, very perfectly pronounced, using words that are very esoteric, but using Hebrew perfectly. He was always the MC. This is the first year in many years he will not be. I forget who's subbing him. But this is when students from around the world come and get their knowledge of Tanakh, of the Bible, tested. It gets increasingly hard. Usually there's a couple students from outside of Israel who make it towards the end. Almost invariably, it's always an Israeli who wins because it is Israel's Independence Day, but it's still a lot of fun to watch and to test your own knowledge. The other thing that happens is Pras Yisrael. Pras Yisrael is the Israel Prize. This is an annual prize given out to select citizens of Israel based on their achievements in various fields. Think like the Nobel Prize, similar topics, not the same categories, but are given out for education, for math, for all sorts of different things. Excuse me. And it's a big event that also takes place on TV, as does Chidon HaTanach. But something you yourselves can create, certainly participate, but you can do your own thing, is a very patriotic event on Yom HaAtzmaut, which is a mangal or al ha'esh. Both of these words mean a barbecue. Very traditional. To go to one, to host one, is a mangal or al ha'esh. Both of these words mean barbecue, but they have a different meaning for each. Mangal is the actual a barbecue. Those of you who know what it looks like an upright keyboard on stilts, right? So it's this rectangular steel or aluminum tray that's only a little bit high where you put the coals, and it's got a grill on the top, and it's supported by 4 legs. That's a mangal. It's actually a Turkish word, and it refers to the actual barbecue set. Al haesh means on the fire. That is more the action of doing barbecue. Okay, both words obviously important, but both words refer to a barbecue, whether it's you're using a mangal set or a Weber grill, whatever it may be, or a hibachi. And then obviously that comes with it, not just the national pastime of having an al haesh, is linafnef. Linafnef is something everyone will fight over doing, that everyone has their best utensil to do it and their best method of doing it. Linafnef is to fan flames. Usually we don't use this in the sense of incitement, but this has the meaning of literally fanning flames, right? When you're trying to get a fire going, this is what you do. Some people use a plastic fan. Some people use a piece of cardboard. Everyone has their different way of doing it to light the coals so that you can start grilling whatever you want to grill. This is an important word and is as much a pastime as al haesh. And finally, because we're talking about celebrating and partying with Yom HaAtzmaut, is a word from slang. That's very important to know. This is a newer word from slang. It actually comes from a subculture of Israeli slang. This comes from gay slang that has now been part of mainstream slang, which is the verb tarimu or tarimu. Tarimu means let's go party. It's the plural, second person plural, so it means you all go party, but it's including yourself as saying it. Yalla tarimu is what you'll normally hear. Yalla, let's go party. Okay, it comes from the slang leharim. In everyday Hebrew means to rise up or to get up or to cause to rise, like ani marim et hapelephone, right? I'm making my cell phone rise up. It also means, because it's to rise up, it also means to get high in its literal and figurative sense. But in slang, it means to go have fun, to go party. Drugs don't have to be a part of how you party. You party how you want. The point, though, is you will hear tarimu quite a lot in everyday people speaking, but also some of the municipalities and formal parties will use the word tarimu to get people to, let's go have fun today. And that would be Thursday. I'm going to stop here, answer some questions, and then we will pause. Shira, can you repeat government secretaries, bitachon, etc.? I'm not going to go through all of them, Shira, but just know that we use, when it's, as opposed to in Israel, where we use the term minister, which is sar or sarah, in anything else will be mazkir or mazkira, and then you fill in what it is at the end. Dictionaries will have this. There are lists of words. You can also, by the way, when in doubt, Wikipedia is a great tool. So if you just type in Secretary of State in Wikipedia, you will get the Hebrew version of that article, and it will have the Hebrew version of it. Usually it's Mazkir Medina, literal translation of it. It can also be Mazkir Chutz, the foreign secretary, or Mazkir Medina, Medina meaning state. Let's go through some more questions here. Yes, Sanford, this is Mazkir, yes, secretary in an office or doctor's office. Secretary in every sense, folks. Secretary in a government, secretary in an office. Any secretary who has the name secretary in English, mazkir or mazkira, depending on the gender. Okay, I'm going to break here to give a couple extra announcements because I see people asking about these questions. This video, I'm told, will go up early tomorrow morning, Israel time, so that you can not only review this ahead of time for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, but just like for all of our videos on YouTube, all you have to do is go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh, you'll see a playlist of all of our previous lessons. So if you want to go over these words, if you weren't able to take screenshots or write them down, you can watch the video, you can pause, you can take your time, you can watch it multiple times to write down all the words. That's how you can get all the words. I see a number of people asking for that in the Q&A. Thank you for asking. That's how you will get them. Okay, so again, tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, which is Erev Yom HaZikaron, it is not yet started here, but here 2022, You will see this in the morning. Just look at youtube.com. If you aren't already subscribed to Nefesh B'Nefesh's channel there, this should be up and running. So you have time to review this, get ready for the 2 days. As always, thank you all so much for joining. Hope you all have a meaningful 2 days ahead. What we normally say in Hebrew, you can say Yom HaZikaron Mo'il or Mashma'uti, both meaning meaningful, or productive is a bad way to translate it, meaningful, and Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach. You will also hear people say Chag Sameach. That one I'll fly with. We talked about Pesach being Chag Sameach only. Yom HaAtzmaut is a big enough deal. We can say Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach or simply Chag Sameach for that as well. You'll already hear people, by the way, wishing you a Chag Sameach. It's not being disrespectful to Yom HaZikaron. It's just understanding that conflict that we talked about at the beginning of class is there as well. So with that, wishing you all a Yom HaZikaron Mo'il, a meaningful Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach, a happy Yom HaAtzmaut, and I will see you all next week. Again, remember, this lesson will go up very quickly tomorrow morning. Please be on the lookout at youtube.com, as well as all of our previous lessons will be there, and we'll see you all next week. Take care. Lihitraot.